It's just me. Okay.
No, it's all these things.
Oh, the light's very ugly.
No, it's me that's doing it. Okay. Well, so we're going to begin. I'm very excited about tonight's event. I'm very excited that on 3 different platforms, we've got over 78 people watching virtually, and I'm sure that'll expand because on Facebook you could just turn up. We're very, it's very exciting. So Kelle, so I know the publicists love it. Kelle and Joan, we've sold a lot of their books already leading up to the event, and then we have a big demand for just regular signature signed copies. So we'll do that, and then Kelle can sign more, of course, when we're in Provincetown for that event. So in 2 days, if you're in Provincetown, at East End Books on Commercial Street, we'll be doing an event with Kelle and Joan, who is the editor of Cape Cod Review, and a very fine poet as well. So we're looking forward to that event. So as you can see, we're in the event space because the store it's not open yet. Our contractor is telling us that they're pretty reasonably sure that we'll be open by mid-November. So we're excited about that, but so we're thankful to the residents and management of 300 Pier Boulevard for allowing us to be in this event space upstairs so that we could still have some events. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of Kelle and Joan. But I did want to mention that I feel a special affinity to Kelle, who I've known a long time, and for a while knew kind of via telephone and email when I was president of Anhinga Press, where we published this wonderful poet. And back in the day, like Kelle and Sylvia Crobuelo and other people that were published by Anhinga. So I feel that it was funny because we were all in Florida, right? But not in the same place. And so then I moved to Provincetown, and at the time Kelle was running the Fine Arts Work Center's summer workshops programs. I had been for a number of years, and I had been visiting, and I ended up seeing Kelle more in Provincetown than I did when I was the president of the press. So that was kind of funny. And then of course Joan I've gotten to know through Fine Arts Work Center, through her workshops, and through our partnership we have with the Fine Arts Work Center. We have a small bookstore there. So if anybody's there, Fine Arts Work Center will be doing the Winter Fridays again this winter. So there'll be fellows reading, returning fellows. I don't know if Joan will be on the schedule. Probably other people throughout the winter. So we'll be there, and the small bookstore there will be open during those events. So Kelle Groom's newest book is How to Live, a Memoir and Essays from Tupelo Press. She's the author of the memoir, I Wore the Ocean in the Shape of a Girl, which I should say continues to sell really well in our Provincetown store and is available there. And when we open here, we've got the books here as well, will be available here in this store. That was a Barnes & Noble's Discover selection, New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, and a Library Journal Best Memoir. She's an NEA Fellow in Prose, Massachusetts Cultural Council Fellow in Nonfiction, and 2-time Florida Book Award winner. Her work appears in Agni, American Poetry Review, Best American Poetry, New England Review, The New Yorker, New York Times, Plowshares, and Poetry, among many others. Her 4 poetry collections include Underwater City, University Press of Florida, Luckily, 5 Kingdoms, and Spill from Anhinga Press. Groom is a nonfiction editor at Agni Magazine. I just wanted to read one quote that I think really encapsulates this book from another writer who I know we both love them very much, and that is Eileen Miles. And so Eileen said, "It's really a book where the tissue between life and death feels very thin at times, and Kelle Groom negotiates these mortal stations like a wandering medieval saint on residencies and short-term teaching jobs, who finds consolation, wisdom, and suicidal despair in violent rain, flashes of feeling in the grasp of a hand, while the euphoria of love and eloquent scraps of knowledge keenly ornament this trail, where being a bare-faced reader is precisely enough. Kelle Groom teaches with a relentless and avid consciousness, and in this story there is a child, and I think It is her own becoming. That's Eileen Miles. So, Joan Wickersham. Joan Wickersham is the author of 4 books, including The News from Spain, which I absolutely love, The Suicide Index, which we have with us here tonight. I should mention we do have the News from Spain available in storage here for the bookstore here in Boston. Her fiction has appeared in Best American Short Stories and the Best American Non-Required Reading. She has published essays and reviews in the Boston Globe, where she also writes a column, the Los Angeles Times, and the International Herald Tribune, and she's contributed on-air essays to NPR. She has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the MacDowell Colony, Yaddo, and more. This is a daughter's moving account of her father's suicide and its impact on her surviving family members. A beautiful, bleak, strong, and fiercely honest book. And I have to say, I know some other friends who are doing the same things. I reread Joan's book. I've read it twice before, along with rereading Kelly's book, because I had an early an early advanced review copy, and it was really fascinating to read the 2 books kind of together. In a way, it reminded me, and I did it flipping back and forth, and it reminded me a little bit, although totally different, of Michael Cunningham. If you've seen that new edition that came out last year of Mrs. Dalloway on the one side, and you flip it over, and it's the hours. If you've seen that beautiful edition, it's great for people who have not read one or the other, but even if you've read both, like I have, it's phenomenal to be able to flip back and forth like that. So again, these are very, very different books, but I appreciated the approach and reading it that way. So excited to be in the presence of these 2 amazing women, phenomenal authors, and I look forward to this conversation. And yes, we will have signed copies available for people that want to buy it on our website, and later people will see the video, and we also will have copies in store in Provincetown and here. If you're watching on Eventbrite, not Eventbrite, my mind is really going, on Vimeo, on our YouTube channel, and on several other streaming platforms that you could get tickets on. For those, you'll need to you can email us. The same thing if you're watching on Facebook, which is what is being shown right now. Email us if you have some questions, and we'll try to get those answered. Also, if you have a personal request, you don't just want the author's signature, but you want it to John, to Sally, to whoever, let us know in the email or on our website when you buy the book, and we'll make sure that happens. Since Joan is nearby here, I can get personalized copies signed. I can go over and meet her and get them signed. And Kelly, like I said, we'll be in Provincetown in 2 days. So if you get us today or tonight or tomorrow, I can get them signed in Provincetown and ship them out to you or have them delivered to you. So anyway, without further ado, I thank you very much and give you Kelly and Joan.
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting the event. Really thrilled to be able to speak with Joan Wickersham, who, we've been talking, I'm thinking maybe, is it 7 years? I'm not sure. When we first, 8. We had our first lunch. So every June we would have an annual long lunch, often at Fenizi's, right on the water in Provincetown, and talk about our writing, what we've been working on for that year. So I've been talking to Joan about this book for a very long time, and this feels like a beautiful continuation of that conversation, especially since I'm not living in Provincetown and at the work center anymore. This book, it deals with navigation and wayfinding. It takes place mostly over 4 years of traveling to places mostly where I'd never been before, where I didn't know anyone. And then also the place that's really home to me, but that I didn't really know as an adult. And I was interested in the idea of home, like where it is, what it is, and also how to live a creative life. Oh, and I also wanted to thank Agni for kindly co-sponsoring this. Thank you. So what I'm going to do, I'll read just a brief excerpt from one essay, and then Joan and I will have a conversation, and I think that you have some short excerpts to look at. And before we start, I'd like to read, I'd like to remember Louise Black, and to read a poem of hers that I found this summer in Provincetown. I was going through all of the Shank Painters, which is the anthology that each year the Fine Arts Work Center Fellows publish. And so this was the very first issue of Shank Painter from 1969-70. And I found this poem, and learned later it was also published in Poetry in 1971, and then in the House on Marshland in 1975. It's called The Undertaking. The darkness lifts. Imagine, in your lifetime, there you are, cased in clean bark you drift, through weaving rushes, fields flooded with cotton. You are free. The river films with lilies, shrubs appear, shoots thicken into palm. And now all fear gives way. The light looks after you. You feel the waves' goodwill as arms widen over the water. Love, the key is turned, extend yourself. It is the Nile, the sun is shining. Everywhere you turn is luck. So the chapter that I'm reading the beginning of is called Star Tables. It takes place in Provincetown in June of 2014. Question: what do you suppose the fixed stars are? Answer: I suppose they are suns to other worlds as they shine with their own light. My downstairs neighbor lets me hold a sextant from 1778. Dark wood sheen, it almost looks new, kept in a broken box under a table. A triangle with an arched bottom, square mirror at the top center, is on a movable arm that connects to the arc, its scale of numbers. Another smaller mirror, the size of 2 thumbnails, is off to the side. To navigate, look at the horizon through this mirror. My neighbor has 2 more lenses, one rosy sepia. These fit one on top of another as in an optician's test, slide into place. We guess it is like sunglasses for an eclipse, or just very bright sun. Light reflects off the top mirror connected to the movable arm. The arm can be moved so that it then reflects off the side mirror and through the eyepiece. Turn the sextant to view the sun over the horizon. Read the angle between the 2 from the scale, a boat-like arc at the bottom of the sextant. For celestial navigation, measure the angle between the horizon and the sun when the sun is at its highest point. Then your tables tell you which line of latitude the sun should be above on that particular day. The tables contain the stars. The sun could be above the Tropic of Capricorn, so that star's latitude is yours. I never thought of the sun above the stars before. In the sky, it's one cloak. A star tables book seems crucial. Longitude is harder. Every hour, the Earth rotates 15 degrees. This means that if the sun is above the longitude of 0 degrees at noon, 1 hour later, it will be above 15 degrees west. You need a very accurate clock. It helps to have the sun right overhead, easy to get lost. My neighbor told me that a woman's boyfriend had been out to sea on his way back to the harbor when his boat went down, into the downslope of a wave. Instead of coming back up, it went straight down into the ocean. They all drowned, he said. I've never heard of such a thing, but if a wave is very high, trenched low, I could see how a ship might not make it back up. The 19th century white window frames are rattling, 16 panes per window, 8 on top, 8 on the bottom. 5 sets look out on the bay at night. My neighbor and I are both here temporarily, in the house that once belonged to the painter Hans Hofmann. I rent the attic apartment from friends, Hofmann's painting studio. My neighbor rents the main house with a friend. Across the courtyard, an architect rents Hofmann's painting school studio, fronted by glass, a wall of fireplace, thick dark beams, planked floor. Soon, a famous TV producer will buy the house and studio. His white couch will wrap around the room. A chandelier will hang. Soon, we'll be gone. Wind so cool, a cold I could drink. Sky pinking, baby blue over the ocean. A houseboat blinks amber light when the night darkens. Wind, like someone trying to get inside tonight. On the street, white roses and white gladiolas spill over the fence, petals cool and dense. All I have to do is breathe. If ever I am ungrateful, let me remember the cold air and open flowers in June, early evening, when I was lucky enough to live here. Look, my neighbor said when I come home. Birds dark against the deep sky, flying toward the ocean. Flowers like white tulle dresses all over the front yard, peonies. Orange poppies so short-lived, they're almost gone before summer even arrives. On the other side of the brick sidewalk leading to our front door, a slightly different longitude means a little orange still lives, though the petals are sleepy. Tonight, the white peonies smell like roses. 45 sunflowers planted on either side of the sidewalk, so by the time I return from Florida, they may line the walk again, rise up, like yellow footmen from the earth. The distance in longitude from Provincetown to Orlando is only about 10 degrees. My body magnetically aligned with true north along these parallels. I'll fly there soon, drive to the beach, live with friends until I can see where to live on the map. The visit to the funeral home in South Yarmouth is tomorrow, halfway up the Cape. The cemetery, a restaurant my Uncle Dean liked, where I'll be with people who love him. Dean, he still feels alive. I worry that tomorrow at the funeral home that he won't, that it will be like that too high wave, that we will be in the deep trough, and how will we come up again?
Thank you. So Kelly, I'm so glad that you referred to our lunches, because I feel like you just described some of what the territory of this book was, but I didn't know until I read it and so in a way, what a gorgeous kind of impressionistic and deeply spiritual book it is, and it's a really. It's so much its own original creature that I want to do it justice in this conversation, and I'm just going to say in advance, I don't think we can. I think it's a really, it's a very, it's like trying to pin down a cloud in a way. And it's just, I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful, utterly original book. I've never read anything like it. And I'm also, so I'm just going to start with some comments.
Okay.
So I think also it's so interesting to me, and I want to ask you about this, but it's not going to be the first question, about that, the fact that you're a poet, the prose, it's prose, but it's not narrative prose, it's poetic prose. So I think that is a real distinctive thing about the book. I also was amazed at the amount of territory, because some of it is in the west. It goes from the west to Cape Cod to Florida. So there's this kind of big triangle of mapping. When you said wayfinding, it's like there's a big map of that, and then there's stuff that looks up at the sky and the stars, there's stuff that's the beach and the ocean, there's stuff that's the desert, and there's just this feeling of this widening universe and this deepening emotional landscape that runs through the book. And then, you know, as you read it, it works by, it accrues as you read it, and that's what I felt reading it. So I think the thing I wanted to ask you to begin with is if you could talk a little bit, you know, Eileen Miles in that quote that Jeff read uses the word wandering, and that was my word also for the book, that it's a really, it's kind of a pilgrimage or wandering of the soul. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what ignited that wandering and also what ignited the writing of the book.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. Well, you know, it started, I was working a full-time admin job in Florida, but I always wanted to write full-time, and so I received a fellowship from Black Mountain Institute at UNLV, and it was half the Library of Congress, half in Las Vegas, and I thought that I would be leaving for a year. So I put everything in storage and, you know, went to DC, and the first thing that happened was somebody that offered me visiting, teaching in Tahoe at Sierra Nevada University, and I'd never been west. But there was this feeling that I was now free. I had somehow freed myself. I didn't live anywhere. Whatever I had fit in my Jeep. And so it felt, and it just kept sort of happening. So what I thought would have been a year, you know, someone else said, well, come to the Santa Cruz Mountains, come to Wyoming. So I just kept going. And that was thrilling to me, to be able to go to places where I'd never been, and to have the freedom to do it, and the freedom to write, and to see these new landscapes and meet people, and yeah, so that's how it started.
And what about the writing? Were you writing as you were doing these travels, or was it retrospective?
Yes, so it started, you know, I had this idea that I was going to investigate this idea of home, looking at my ancestors, so from Finland, Ireland, and Wampanoag. And so actually, prior to the Library of Congress, I went to the American Antiquarian Society in Worcester. So a year before that, so that's where it really started. And I started doing all this research, but the more, and then I kept a journal. So the journal, you know, became the basis of what this is. But at a certain point, I realized, oh, the Wampanoag, the ancestors, that's a different book. So I had to take that out of it. And then it became more, it was because I didn't mention it, but it's also this idea of like how to live with fear and uncertainty. That was one of the first essays that I wrote. It was published in Plowshares. And it was really important to me to do the things that I was afraid to do.
You know, it's the title, I definitely think that title is a brilliant title because it seems like a philosophical title, you know, that it's like a Montaigne kind of title of how to live and how to live a good life, how to live a purposeful life. But there's also a kind of a desperation, I think, in that title, and that comes through in the book as well. You know, really looking at who do I belong to, where do I belong, who belongs to me?
Yes.
And I felt that those questions were, I don't know whether those particular questions were articulated, but those I kept thinking those questions as I was reading, that was part of what was driving.
Yes, those are just constant questions, and you know, that's, you know, still a daily, those are still daily questions, yeah.
You know, I also was really interested as you know, just looking at the writing, you know, early on in the book, you talk about your grandmother's death and going to visit your grandmother in her house, and that's one of the houses. The houses is another theme that runs through the book.
Yes.
But I'm just going to read this because it's actually, I'll ask you to read it, Kelly. If you could just read on page 14, if you could just read chapter 4.
Oh, sure. Oh, and this is actually from How to Live with Uncertainty. It's now called The City Beautiful because it relates to Orlando, but yeah. 4. Someone I loved was moving across the sea to another country, leaving Orlando, the city beautiful. And as I drove to his house on the road where the disappeared groves still stood, I looked into the green, the bright oranges I'd known since I was a child, and talked to God. I was afraid for my friend's safety, but he wasn't the only one. And I'd been trying to correct the fear with prayer. If I didn't, anything could happen. I asked God if I could stop this. I needed to stop. I could get down on my knees in the orange groves and beg for it to stop. I said, I'll just trust you to keep everyone safe. And when the fear came, instead of words, I'd remember the moment of trust beside the oranges, the whole grove already damaged, doomed by freeze upon freeze, growers spraying the trees with water in winter so ice could keep them warm. It worked for 10 years. When the fear came back, the grip was worse than childhood. The death of my grandmother undid me. The house full of white flowers drawn on white paper. When the bank froze my money, I hung my clothes from trees. I sat in the Quaker meeting house one night a week, and it calmed me some. The wood gleamed, and I looked into where it shone.
Well, you know, that long paragraph is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, that it's this accrual of little vivid details like the orange groves and the wood in the church, but then you earn the right to have these big sentences like the death of my grandmother undid me. You know, and I think that your choices about where to look through the microscope and where to look through the bigger lens at something like the death of my grandmother undid me, I think there's just a real power in that mix of big and little all through the book. And it's such a, you know, the paradox of writing always is that the more specific you make it, the more universal it is.
Yes.
And
yes.
I felt that also reading the book, that even though the reader might not have your particular experiences, I think the vulnerability and the specificity of the book is going to speak to any honest person who's reading it. Yeah. So let me just see what order. Oh, I know. So I wanted to ask you about, you referred in the reading you just did, not in the first reading,
Yes.
you referred to the Hans Hoffman house.
Yes.
And I was very interested in, a lot of the book is you living in other people's houses. And particularly, I thought it was fascinating that there's a section about living in Hans Hoffman's old house in Provincetown.
Yes.
And then there's also a section about living in James Merrill's house in Stonington,
Yes.
Stonington?
Well, Stonington, right next to Mystic.
Yeah, in Connecticut, that is now an artist's residency, which you had for 4 months. And so I wondered if you could talk about each of those specific experiences and the ghosts, you're haunted in some ways by the ghosts of these artists.
Well, I was certainly more haunted by the James Merrill, not him, but the house. But the Hans Hoffman house, you know, that was such an amazing gift. I had been traveling for a few years at that point, and I had gone to my parents' place in Wellfleet. I had been teaching in the Tahoe year, came to my parents' place in Wellfleet, and they sold it. And I didn't have another residency from September to January. And I really, it was like, I really did not know what I was going to do. And then 2 friends who live in New York, who summer own that condo, said no one's lived there for a long time in the winter, but if you'd like to, you could live there. And it was glorious. You know, it's looking over the Cape Cod Bay. It was winter. I mean, it was these 18th century windows rattling. It's a small space, so I measured it with my feet. I was just, it had these alcoves for the beds. It was just a magical place. I felt very lucky to be there. And then I went from there to the James Merrill house. You know, that was quite a large space. So his barber was on the first floor, and there were 2 residential apartments on the second. But then I had the 3rd floor, the 4th floor, and then there's the roof as well. So there's James Merrill's apartment and his partner's apartment, and I stayed in his partner's. But I had the run of the house, and it was winter. It was like lots of snow. I was by myself quite a lot. And I don't know if you've seen Merrill's apartment, but it's just, the scarlet walls and this giant gilt, almost to the ceiling mirror, the Ouija board room. So that's where he's called the spirits for 20 years. And I was scared of that room. So I thought, how did they know not to come back? Like, did they leave when he was finished? So I just kept, I would go in there in the daytime, and also his hidden library was in there, his whole music collection, so I would play his records. His phone was there with messages on it, from 1995. And also the library, so all of the books, many of these are like first, second editions of books that of poets that I just loved. And then the secret library was filled with all of these, periodicals and, so anyway, I would go in there, I'd just try to sit there, play the music, play his records, and, try to stay past dark, and I just kept trying to work through that fear of being there. But I wasn't, I just felt so grateful to him. I mean, he gave this house to the town. I mean, what an amazing gift. And then basically, as he left it, writers started coming in 1995 and staying there. So, just to have all that time and space and solitude, I think the solitude was just so crucial to just be able to think and read and be there.
And you were writing the James Merrill House section of the book while you were there, so
yes.
that's a real section also.
Yes. Yeah.
So Kelly, I just have a couple more questions for you, and then maybe if there are any questions that are coming in, we can do those, or else I can keep asking questions. But one question I have for you that I think it's fascinating when someone who's written a memoir writes another memoir, because it's really, sometimes it's a sequel, which yours isn't, and sometimes it's just a different creature, and that's what I felt about yours. And I wondered if there, I wore the ocean in the shape of a girl is, it's a narrative memoir. It's first this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It's still your poetic prose, but it's sequential narrative. And I felt part of what we were doing in this book was saying, the hell with narrative. I'm not going to do narrative. I'm just going to do these incredibly intense, focused, associative, quantumless essays. But I wondered if it was hard, what was it like to write a second memoir? Were you haunted by the first one?
Well, I did try at one point to make that connect, to make this into a memoir, and it didn't work. What I wanted to do with this book is I wanted each essay to be its own separate world, and I organized it and titled it by place, changing a lot of titles. So it is each is a different place, each is a separate world. I mean, that felt very different from the first. Yeah.
Did you worry that you were mentioning some of the same events that you had
From the first one?
Yeah.
I didn't really mention too much. I mean, the first book is really, the goal of that was to find my son who had died from leukemia, find out about his life and to know him in whatever way that I could. And it began in a hospital in Florida in 1981, ends in a hospital in Boston in 1982, and there are 27 years in between. So that is just it is one entire thing, but this one was, and both books are about discovery. I'm trying to find something, but this one really, it is that wandering and just that wayfinding and navigating. I mean, a lot of lostness. And I really want to be able to just drop into moments and just stay there and look around and, you know, they're built of moments.
Yeah, no, I noticed even in the prose, I mean, the prose is prose, but it's poetic. I mean, a lot of times you just don't use a verb, or you don't dispense with articles, and, you know, I mean, it's grammatically a very interesting book, because I think there's a way that the sentences are sort of very, very crystal clear, but they're kind of incomplete. And I thought that was part of the vividness of reading it was those sentences that were saying, hey, pay attention.
Oh, good. Well, I was also, in both books, what I was trying to do is just, you know, overhear myself. So to lean in and be like, is it true? Is it true? Like, to keep doing that, to get as close in as I can. And that's not often grammatical.
Yeah. Did you write stuff that you thought wasn't true that you threw out?
Well, it's just the idea of not getting close enough in, like, you know, to just really be able to, hear, and also so the reader is really hearing, and it's not, it's just as close as I can get.
Yeah, but it just felt real. I mean, I find a lot that I just feel like I'm writing something, and I feel like I'm being false on the page. And I have to check it. But did you have that experience writing this book, or?
I mean, I'm sure that there must, you know, because I would keep asking the question, like, so that, you know, it's in revision. So often what I'll do with revision is I'll write, like, here's a chapter, or here's an essay, and I'll write it. And then the next night, I would go back, and then without looking at what's there, write the whole thing again. And then the next night, without looking at either of those, write the whole thing from the start again. And then in revision, look at all of it. Because every time you know, what I'm bringing in is different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the ordering of the book has changed a lot in your revision. The revision of the whole book has
Yes.
You did a lot of revising of that too, didn't you?
Yeah, but you know, I still feel like the core of it is, I mean, it is basically chronological. I mean, there's a lot of, someone said that it was like past, present, and future are basically all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's why the dates and times and places are so important. So that, because I want the reader to be grounded. I don't want them to feel like, you know, what's happening. So, because there's a lot, as you said, like shifting in the pieces themselves. But it starts, I mean, not at the very beginning, but in the second chapter, it's starting with DC. It's starting with that first, you know, going, that first traveling. And then it's ending toward the very end, which is leaving Provincetown.
Yeah, no, I felt very anchored all the way through. And definitely I felt a progression from a kind of, you know, desperation and desolation to something else.
Yeah.
But not, you know, it was subtle, but it was really, I believed it. So.
Well, and it's also, you know, much of that came from Provincetown because of that experience there.
Yeah. And so then the last sort of general area I wanted to talk about was, you know, the how to live. I said, you know, it's philosophical, and it's also a kind of desperate question, like how to live rather than die.
Yes.
But then I also was curious about, you know, you are a poet, you're a memoir writer, you're a teacher, you're an arts administrator, and I just wondered, and an editor. And so how do you live that life? How do you make all those things work and keep all those spheres going?
Yeah. Well, you know, some things I had to let go.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I have to say, like, what is the most important thing? You know, there was a Zoom presentation that Agni did where Askell spoke. Maybe it was for the 50th, I'm not sure, but someone asked him, can you be an editor and be a writer? And what he said, I think of it almost every day, which is, he said, yes, but you have to give your energy to the writing first. And so often I'll be like, oh, I could go do, you know, so then it's like, no, what am I giving my energy to first? So that boundary is really important to me. I had to give up. I mean, I was doing the admin work, I was teaching, I was writing, and so at a certain point I was teaching for a low residency MFA, and I had to let that go. And yeah, I'm just very strict with my phone is off at 5 p.m. I'm not reachable. My phone is off on the weekend. I can't hear it if it rings, so it's just, that's sacred. I'm not available, and that's when my writing can happen.
And do you also have times during the year when do you do these residencies?
Yes. Yeah, so actually as part of my contract, I negotiated to have, and I've done it before, and I think it's fairly common for nonprofits, to have 1 month off a year just for a residency, not a vacation, and in lieu of salary. And what that means is I can go and just generate and come back with a lot of material. And then on the night, nights and weekends, I'm not trying to come back from zero, or start from zero. I've got, a lot of material.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that really helpful too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do we have any, are there any questions?
No, there, do we have some audience questions?
Sure, I have one. You've talked about the difference between, when you dig into your unconscious, something you're channeling there. So, can you talk about the difference for you as a writer when you're digging and what comes up is poetry, and when you're digging and what comes up is lyrical prose and memoir or whatever nonfiction?
Well, I mean, I think it's the intention when I sit down. So often when I sit down, I'm saying I'm writing a poem. I'm going to write a poem. Or I've decided that I have this idea for an essay and I'm writing. I'm starting, and I need more room. I need more space for this. But the process for both, it is very similar in that I'm trying. Gosh, I read, it was an interview in the Paris Review recently, and I wish I remember who it was, but they said every time you sit down to write, it's like stepping off into the dark. Like, I love that. I'm stepping off into the dark. I don't know, what's going to happen, but I want to go down into moments. I want images or moments. Like, the process is fairly similar. That's going to be a catalyst for it, and I'm going to want to do that quite often through whichever form it is.
Kelly, I was wondering, in producing this book and writing this book, as you already talked about kind of the process of how you were working on it, did you start out at the beginning with some parts that by the end of the process you felt just didn't work and didn't get included? Or is that final manuscript, pretty much what you had envisioned, from the beginning?
I had maybe 10 or 12 chapters that are what I would call the Wampanoag chapters, and so all of those had to come out because I realized that's a separate book. I mean, there may have been like a chapter or two that I didn't keep, but in general, I don't think I really. I also, part of the process of putting the book together, because I didn't really have, in school you have readers, and you have readers for years after that, but then I didn't really have readers, and writers are very busy, and so the readers of my work were editors at magazines, and so I loved, having this a brilliant mind reading my work, and so most of the pieces were only, they'd only been read by me and an editor, and then sometimes they were, well, these were obviously they were all published, but I'm sorry. losing the track.
Yeah, that pretty much answered it. I knew the section, I didn't realize how big a section on the Wampanoag section was pulled out. So there was multiple chapters, and then, you were just talking about that not too many others were pulled out in terms of.
Yeah, and because these were so, many of them extremely well edited, all the Agni essays, and the Common did a wonderful job with a piece in here as well. That I felt like they were ready. They weren't drafts. They were in their final version. So it was just kind of figuring out like how do you organize it, and it is basically chronological. Hello.
Hi, it's so nice to see you. It's
Oh,
nice to see Joan as well. You've published your first book with a Big Five publisher, and now you're with an independent press. And I was wondering if you could speak to each of those experiences.
Sure. Well, so I Wore the Ocean. It was, I had published 3 chapters of it in Plowshares. And, before that, I had all in Hanger Press and University Press of Florida poetry publications. And then my editor read them and loved them, and then, said wanted to read anything that I had, and I met with him, and it was just really inspiring that someone wanted to see this book, that wanted me to finish it. And so I mean, there were things I had to live through that I had to do that I was terrified and I'd never been able to do. But the idea that someone cared and wanted to, read this. So finished the book, and then it was published. So I mean, I think it's different in that there's there's a great publicity resources, that with that book, and I think that it it got quite a lot of reviews, and but I come from independent presses. I come from university and small presses, and I just I feel like they're really important. And what Tupelo is doing is they've been mainly a poetry press, but they're interested in publishing experimental nonfiction. And I'm interested in writing experimental nonfiction. And I don't think those Big Five, are going to. Anyway, so I'm grateful to Tupelo for supporting work like mine and really making beautiful books of it.
Thank you.
I was interested about what you said about trying to make this a narrative at first, and then realizing that didn't fit.
Yes.
I was just curious if there was more to that. What about the wayfinding or navigating maybe that said to you, the structure is not a narrative?
Yeah, so it's just so much about discovery and about that wandering and being lost and just being open to whoever I'm meeting and wherever I am. And what happened when I wrote it as a more traditional memoir is that I had to try to link everything. I had to put this connective tissue in. But it made it feel as if I actually knew, and I was giving you some sort of self-help instruction. The whole idea of I love the how-to essay in that, and many of these began as how-to essays, is how to make a shoe in here. You're not gonna learn how to make a shoe. So that, anyway, I like the simplicity of that, and then, changing it. So, yeah.
Kelly, I'm just curious, was the number of years at Fine Arts Work Center when you were employed there and you were doing all the amazing stuff you were doing, was that the longest period of time with one nonprofit that you were with?
Yes.
At this point?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it was. Yes. I mean, I love the Fine Arts Work Center. That was an amazing place to be for those years. And I met so many amazing people. So, yes.
Questions? I was struck by what you mentioned, and was you brought up about the differences with the, or you did, so about the a bigger publisher versus a smaller publisher, and I was talking, this is probably, was it last year, I guess, Michael Cunningham, about that, just the whole issue about today's dynamic with social media and everything else, that even if you're with a big publisher and they assign a publicist, they've got so many writers that they have to work for, it's like they're working for the government. They're overworked, they're overloaded. So you really have to be, like I have to say, I've told authors, you really have to be like the drag queens on Commercial Street, hawking your wares and saying, come to my show, because you're the best advocate, and getting out there. So it's just fascinating to see that, and I've talked to a number of friends, who are sell lots of books, and they're kind of like, yeah, we hire our own private publicists, and then we're out on social media, and people have different comfort levels in terms of being out there on social media and being responsive on social media, and the fans who want you to interact almost instantly with them. So I did an event with the Hebridean baker, Kalish MacLeod from Scotland, and he is has a cooking show in Gaelic on BBC, and multiple beautiful cooking books and stuff. And he is like, I don't know when he sleeps because he's much younger, constantly on social media, and people are on all those different types of social media, including TikTok, and he's responding to them, and he's selling books because he's constantly on there. He's doing TikToks, he's on all this other stuff, and his husband, less so. His husband is a gardener and has a show on BBC as well, but it's just fascinating. I'm just wondering, to you, because I know a lot of authors are introverts, and I'm what I call a situational extrovert. I'm just wondering where you fit there, and how comfortable you are or are not in terms of engaging a lot on social media with your fans, or maybe people that might be fans.
I mean, with I Love the Ocean, social media was a completely new thing for me. I was told I needed to get Facebook, and I was like, Facebook? I do not, how do you friend someone? Is that like, can you just friend anybody? I had no idea. So I started doing it, but really, I did a lot of social media for the work center, and so I felt really comfortable doing that to promote others' work and readings and workshops, and so I feel comfortable with it now. I think it's important to let people know what you're doing. But writing is solitude, so I think it's the same thing with the boundaries that you have to have with everything else. Okay, you're going to do social media, but it's going to be, this is how I can do that. Same thing with any of the types of work that you do, or social life or whatever. So, but the writing is the core thing, and that is a work that happens in solitude, and not when I'm busy, responding and posting.
I have two questions that we got earlier today. Nothing else is pulled up here, but if somebody in the audience wants to ask a question next, I can pull up. Yeah, please do.
So the other thing I was thinking about, I'm in a memoir writing course now, and so we talk a lot about progression, and especially like the internal progression of the narrator, and showing that, and with fierce attachments, when we discussed that, we talked about like the push and pull, and how that was more subtle. And I was just thinking about what's been talked about today, and how your book's being described, and I was thinking, that could be perhaps especially challenging in essays that are associated, and then also with the topic of wayfinding, and it says search. And I was just curious if you had any thoughts about how you looked at that piece of it in this work, right? And giving the reader sort of this progression feeling, but preserving, I guess, the exploration authenticity.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Well, the progression, I guess, the travel gives it some motion. So you are going from place to place. So there is that. But I don't know about. When I wrote I Were the Ocean, and we were in the editing process, an editor said to me, "We promised them redemption. We need more redemption." And I was like, "It's my life. I can only be as redeemed as I am." And so I feel the same way with this. Like, I mean, it is important seeing myself, that I see myself as a character, and mostly that's because I want to be able to bring the compassion that I would bring to anyone, to myself, and to be able to see myself more fully. But I can only write it. I can only write what is my life. So I think that there is a progression because, as I move, I mean, lots of things happen along the way, and there's just like the people that I meet, like there are all these changes. There's a line from James Merrill in the book, When I Visit His House, where he says, "I let the light change also me." And I write, I want that. And so I want that change. And so I feel like, it does happen. And by the end of the book in Provincetown, as I'm leaving, I feel it. I feel that there is a progression, but it's only because I've lived it, not.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of accumulating those Wampanoag sections and then realizing that they didn't belong? I mean, it almost seems like an associative balance or pacing is so important to a book like this. There must have been a moment when there was enough material that you suddenly realized you couldn't keep that there and preserve any sense of pacing with the rest.
Yes. It was just massive. I mean, right now I think it's maybe 278 pages. But imagine you've got another 12 chapters in there, and it was also just like unbalanced. I mean, it was so much of my work is about trying to find or discover, and here I was trying to find Thomas Greenough, and that was really it just wasn't like he deserves his own finding, not as some kind of I don't know, way of looking at my own. It's a separate thing.
Well, we'll just end with this one question that was asked to both of you that we received, and that was that, I'm just summarizing, that both of your, Kelly's book, new book, but also your first book, and then of course, in particular, Joan's book that we have with us tonight, are both very, very personal books. And the question was, were you ever hesitant to send the book to an editor after you completed it, or as you were writing it, worried about the fact that you felt too exposed? How did you get, if you did feel that way, how did you get through that process? Obviously you did, because the books were published, but it just seemed, and now I'm saying this part, not the person, the question, it seemed so brave, so very brave, for both of you to be writing those books. These are amazing books, but you're sitting there. I know I had to keep pausing for different reasons for both of your books, because there's so much in there that I need to catch a breath. Like with Joan's book, it's nowhere near the same, but I had to take a lot of breaths like I did with A Little Life, with Hanayana Gahara's book, because there was so much in there. It was brilliant, but you had to stop for a bit. And then Kelly's new book, How to Live, I just found it quite remarkable that it's even if it's one paragraph, it's like a book. You've got to stop yourself, and take it in. That's what I had to do, and I've read it several times now, and it's just amazing. But to their original question is like, did you, maybe even before you started, thought to myself, well, I've got other books. No, I don't think I can do that. And I know that I feel that same way. Like, if some of the short fictions, other things I've had published, I've worried have been a little exposed, and I've got a novel that's almost done. Finally, it's fiction, but there are parts of it that that I do feel exposed, because it really is, some sections are me. And so I found myself pulling stuff out, and then I've dragged it on a little bit too long with this novel because I've been concerned about that. Anyway.
Well, I mean, that question has a lot of different elements to it. I mean, one of them is the worry about hurting people or exposing yourself. And I think the worry about hurting people, I think I don't think there's ever been a memoir written or published where the writer didn't struggle with that question. So I think different people work that out differently. I mean, I know with my book, I tried really hard to protect the privacy of the people involved, but I didn't. I felt that there were details that I didn't put in because they felt gratuitous, but there were details I felt had to go in because I was trying to really represent what the messiness of a suicide in a family was, and if I cleaned it up too much, then I wasn't being loyal to the truth that I was trying to write about. So I think I had to wrestle with that a lot. The process of writing it was actually really hard as long as I was writing it badly. And then once I finally, 10 years into the process, found the right voice and the right form, it was actually a relief to write it because I felt like, oh my God, this is, I'm getting it. I'm getting it finally. So that, I think, that, when I asked you before about the writing false,
Yes,
I find that
yes.
no matter what I'm writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or poetry, if I'm writing baloney, I know I'm writing baloney,
Yes.
and I can't stand it. So the relief of getting the right voice for the suicide index was huge. And the third part of the question that I understood was sending it out to the editors. And I feel like a lot of editors, when you're writing about something painful, a lot of editors will recoil and just say like, "Ooh, a book about suicide, ooh." And that was awful because I felt like part of what I was writing about was stigma. I felt like my father became a pariah when he killed himself, and I felt like every rejection I got felt like re-pariahizing him. And that was really hard. Like I felt as if people were rejecting the book because it was too uncomfortable, and that I just felt like the minute my father died that way, it was like everybody who knew him felt, who loved him, still loved him, but if I would say to a friend, this is what happened, they would sort of say like, oh, and there was this, oh, and I think that was the painful part of it for me, was getting that reaction from editors. So I think, I'll just say one quick thing and then I'll turn it over to Kelly. I think it's important when you're writing something difficult to let it cool off for a while before you send it out. I think to send it out when it's still red hot for you, I think you're just asking for more pain.
When you talk about like these three parts to it, I think writers will sometimes say, "Oh, I can't write this until my parents are dead," or it always makes me so sad. I mean, you can write anything. It's like conflating it from writing it to publishing it all in one moment, and it isn't. It's like a many-staged thing. So what I think for me the thing to do is just to write it. Just write it and be as close and as truthful as I possibly can. And then, once you get to another point where you're going to publish, you want to actually share that with the public, then I did have an issue, particularly with one essay in this book, and I just really struggled with it, and I reached out to 3 writers, including Joan, and I asked for help. 3 writers who I greatly admire and are doing, the hardest work, and so I was able to take their advice and then go back into the essay. But the most important thing when dealing with other people, I think, is what is my story to tell? Like, there were other stories from other people that really related. I thought, but it's not my story to tell, and it was very sensitive material. So And it's also like, what am I writing out of? I mean, there can't be any agenda, against, someone that I have, that it has to, I think it always has to be from a place that's of love, that I'm writing, of love, and so then I can feel okay with what that final version is. Even if I have said some things that, may hurt someone, it was my story to tell.
Sounds great. Any final questions? Sue? I will remind people, if you happen to be in Provincetown in 2 days, Kelly will be there, and you can also tune in virtually because she'll be in conversation with Joan with Cape Cod Literary Review, so there'll be a different conversation. So I would encourage you to tune in virtually again, or if you're going to be there, to come on by to East End Books at 389 Commercial Street. We want to thank again everybody for coming tonight, and thank these two phenomenal authors for being here.